Before we go on to the players, one of my favourite parts of this transfer window has been reading and listening to Newcastle writers and journalists who, for about a decade during January transfer windows, have basically put their feet up and done nothing, and now are absolutely shattered.
Well, yeah, and now I have the slightest idea of what it's like to be David Ornstein during a window, because this is only the slightest idea, because it's not quite that extent. But yeah, it's gone from one extreme to another. This used to be almost put time off in January for me, or wait till deadline day. They might sign someone online on deadline day, but no, it's just been absolute. I knew it was going to be manic, but I just had no comprehension. And even going into deadline day, I knew that was going to be manic. But yesterday it just went to a different level as well.
Have they had to have a slightly, I don't know if scattergun approach is a bit too strong, but have they had to be varied in who they've been trying to get simply because of their situation? And I mean that both where they are in the table and both the perceived amount of money they have to spend. So they might be going for a certain player, and the club that they're trying to buy that player from will take the mick because they know Newcastle have got a lot of money. Or they might go for another player in that same position. The fee's all right with the club, but the player might not want to go because of the situation that Newcastle are in the table. So for every player that they have signed, have they had to have 7 targets, 8 targets?
Oh, without doubt. I mean, the plan before the start of the window, basically the plan has changed several times. When they first took over the club, the idea was they might spend about 40 or 50 million, bringing sort of 3 players, strengthen the spine of the team. Then when Eddie Howe came in, it changed slightly. He had certain targets that he wanted certain positions filled. And then as their position became increasingly perilous in the table, it became that they needed even more signs. So coming into the start of the window, Kieran Trippier was a priority, as was Sven Botman as a centre-back. And then they wanted players on top of that. They obviously got Trippier, did not get Botman, also wanted Diego Carlos, did not get him, had several centre-backs, both in terms of domestically and abroad, who they looked at. So in the end, they got Dan Burn, but all window, they had sort of Nat Phillips and James Tarkowski somewhere on the list. Both Tarkowski's probably unattainable, but also Howe wanted more someone who's probably more comfortable on the ball, and Dan Burn's been playing that way at Brighton. So that's one sort of example. But in certain positions, there was claims at one stage that they had sort of 45 player deep lists for certain positions, and there were inquiry. I mean, what's astonishing about this window is that although a lot of the names out there, some of them were maybe exaggerated in some ways, that there was a shred of truth in so many of them, because Newcastle, to try and find out who was available and to try and to see who may be interested for all the reasons that you said, Newcastle put out inquiries or feelers to so many players to try and find out who they could get in. So at various points of the window, and in that long piece that you mentioned that we've done, we just touch upon just a few of them. And then there was also sort of, I would describe it as almost misinformation out there in terms of certain players. I mean, all the way through the January window, we had this Ousmane Dembele saga playing out in Barcelona. And journalists in Barcelona were calling me and saying, people at Barcelona are telling me that Newcastle are going to sign Ousmane Dembele. And it's just like, they're not going to sign Ousmane Dembele. They're being used in that sense as well to help clubs to either portray an image or to help with contract talks and certain negotiations. And also it's been put out that Newcastle are offering £200,000 a week wages to players who may leave a club because that's in their club's interest to say he's gone for all that money. And Newcastle were quite clear from early on they didn't want to really break what has been a tight wage structure under Mike Ashley in one window if possible. So there's so much complication in this window.
Put aside the fact, and then we can bring Adam and David in, put aside the fact that Newcastle have actually just brought some players in, which on its own will generate excitement compared to previous transfer windows. Is the business good?
I think the business is good. I don't think that I would probably score it maybe 7, possibly 8 out of 10. Ironically, the final signing was the one that probably needed most in terms of a centre-back. That was the priority throughout, to sign a left-sided centre-back. Ideally, they wanted 2. They only got 1. I think Kieran Trippier is a very good signing. Chris Wood was almost a necessity signing. He hasn't quite looked in form yet, but he's someone that just needed a striker. They missed out, obviously, in the end on the likes of Jesse Lingard and also Hugo Ekitike. They really needed one more sort of attacking player if possible, because they're not scoring enough goals as well as conceding too many. But I think Bruno Guimaraes, they desperately needed a number 6 tile midfielder. He's who they wanted. They pushed from late in the window. They got him. So I think the business has been good, not absolutely spectacular in the sense that I don't think that you can say now they categorically definitely will survive. I think they have a better chance, but I think it's a good window, if not an absolutely exceptional one.
Yeah, I think there are 5 players that go straight into the team, you'd probably say. Maybe unless Callum Wilson's fit, and then maybe would get, if he only plays with one striker. The centre-back one worries me a bit, just in terms of, when you think to the start of the window, and this isn't Newcastle's fault, it's just unable to do the deal in the end with Sevilla or with Lille. But I think to go from Botman and Diego Carlos to Dan Burn, it is a downgrade, I think, in terms of where Eddie Howe wanted that to go. I think that's pretty indisputable. So I think that's the one position that would worry me a bit. I think, but they're stronger at fullback, stronger in midfield. I think they should be able to control games a little bit more as a result. But I think this whole thing really relies on a player coming in from France, a Brazilian player, Bruno Guimaraes, and hitting the ground running. I think because he's going to have to be the glue that sort of brings all this together from the middle of the pitch. And that's not easy. We've seen a lot of players, Tottenham have just sent a record transfer back to Lyon on loan for the rest of the season in Tanguy and Ndombele. I think you can't underestimate how difficult it can be to just transition immediately in a high pressure environment into the Premier League. But I think, with the other signings, they've brought Premier League know-how. I think there's a bit of a guarantee that you get with Trippier and Target, Wood, what you're getting. So I think they'll be relatively happy. It makes them better. But as Chris says, I don't think it's necessarily enough that you look at Newcastle now and you think, God, all those other teams down there are in huge trouble because of what they've done.
Who did they miss out on that you think they really, I know you mentioned Botman, but that they really thought they were going to get?
I think Diego Carlos from Sevilla.
Lingard would be the other one, I'm guessing, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, those are the 3 players who come the end of the window. I think Newcastle will be frustrated because at various points, I think that they thought they were all possible. Botman, I think they went in the window with Boyd thinking that could happen and that could be an exciting deal. He'd shown a sort of willingness to come, but obviously Lille wouldn't deal with them. Diego Carlos, at various stages over the course of a few weeks, they thought that was going to happen. Again, the player showed a willingness, but Sevilla, they couldn't agree a fee with Sevilla. They alleged that the goalposts changed at various points, but there was a lot in that deal and it didn't happen. Jesse Lingard, again, I mean, they walked away from the deal at several points, but you always felt maybe when that comes to the very end of the window, something could happen. And obviously, as David reported yesterday, they did go back in from and there was a hope that it could even happen on deadline day. And Lingard himself wanted to go out and play. And I think those 3 players, again, would have been a step up on anything else Newcastle had signed. They would have immediately gone into the team. So they're the 3 I think they really will look back and rue to a certain extent. Just to pick up on Adam's point about the signings, I do think it's interesting that the Guimaraes is slightly different to all the rest because all of the others, Howe sort of preached the need for Premier League experience. When they didn't get Botman and Carlos, he said, right, what I want is someone who's played in the Premier League. And that's why they ended up getting Dan Burn. Guimaraes, they recognise there's a sort of calculated gamble there to a certain extent. They looked at Yves Bissouma at Brighton, who they've liked for a lot of years. They looked at a few other players domestically, but they've taken a bit of a calculated gamble on Bruno Guimaraes, hoping that he can, because Newcastle are so poor at retaining the ball, and Guimaraes, that's one of the things he's very good at. He's good at playing out from tight positions. He's good at hopefully moving the team up the pitch. And so they've taken that calculated gamble and hope that he, along with Trippier, is someone that can build around for the future, hopefully in the Premier League.